Angie here, coming to you to expound upon a topic we quickly talked about but didn't explore in great detail: spring art of making an herbal infused vinegar. Essentially, this is the same process as making a tincture, and the liquid part of the tincture is called the menstruum. So you can use apple cider vinegar or alcohol as the menstruum. Today we're just going to focus on making an apple cider infused vinegar and put in some really nutrient-rich plants that are going to have vitamins and minerals from the spring harvest in order to then strain them out and have a lovely base for a salad dressing that we can sneak into people who would otherwise maybe not want to drink a tea. So what did we collect today? I am going to very delicately display this first one, stinging nettles, a whole basket full of them. A beautiful, gorgeous spot is a place with slightly wet soil on the downhill side of an old barn. They love to grow where animals used to go. So we found these stinging nettles right on the side of the river, on the side of an old 150-year-old, not even a barn, but like a shed where sheep and chickens used to reside. They didn't actually graze on the hillside there, but I'm sure that a lot of the hay and manure was tossed out on that side, and they grow from this super rich soil, therefore taking in the nutrients. These are my fresh nettles, and we need to be careful. They're stinging nettles. They have urtic acid, which is held on tiny little hairs along the stems and leaves. And so before chopping them, I am going to put on some gloves. What else do we have today? Well, in high abundance are the dandelions. Today we're going to chop up some of the roots of the dandelions, which I have been drying in this bowl. And we're also going to chop up, let me get a couple out here. I like to chop the roots before I dry them, but I was in a hurry, so I just laid them to dry because I didn't want them to rot. Generally speaking, I chop them first. We also harvested the dent de lion, or dandelion leaf. See why they call it dent, or teeth, de lion, or lion? Right? It looks like the teeth of a lion, if you use your imagination. These are incredibly rich, also a diuretic. It helps the kidneys move the flow of urine and excrete any toxins. So we're going to put those in our cider vinegar. We've harvested comfrey, which also grows on an old homestead site. Comfrey is a very persistent plant. We would never recommend to plant it in the garden. However, it does continue to come back year after year, even just like in a side hill in the back 40 in the lawn that gets lots and lots of sunlight. Comfrey leaf and comfrey root is an incredible vulnerary. It heals a site of illness, of an injury. Topically and internally, it's a cell regenerative, which is most of its actions. So it can heal over the mucous membranes inside of the body as well as the skin, causing the skin to regenerate cells in order to grow and heal over what would otherwise be a scar. Comfrey is often used for tendons, ligaments, and bones by using a topical poultice. And for our purposes today, it's a spring green that is filled with nutrients, and we're going to put it into our apple cider vinegar. Just a little bit. We also walked past the raspberry patch. And in the raspberry patch, we had red raspberry leaves coming up. It's a great tonic astringent for the uterus especially, but for any part of the body that is made out of tissue, which is everything. And we're going to just put some of the red raspberry leaves into our tonic. I'm laying them all here because we'll have a couple options when we go to chop them up. Red raspberry leaf is incredibly nutrient rich. It's one of the reasons that we have pregnant women drink tea made out of red raspberry leaves. And it's also great tonifying for the digestive system. If there's any kind of leaky gut symptoms, it will tonify the gut tissue all the way down to all of the tissue. From the mouth, you'll feel dryness in the throat, the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines, the large intestines. Meanwhile, the uterus and the female organ system is also affected. Finally, the last plant that we're going to use today is one of my very favorite bitters, the motherwort leaf. Motherwort is essentially a very persistent weed. I didn't have any on my land, and at some point I brought a pot to plant, and winter came early and it never got planted in the soil. Some kind of magic happened because I never saw this plant flower in its pot, but I did leave the pot out by the hose all winter. And the next season I had motherwort growing on one side of the wildland beside it and another side of the wildland beside that. Now mind you, my wildland is about 1/3 of an acre, so I don't have much land, but in there's gardens and there's a lot of wild space. It's now growing amongst a very, very persistent invasive weed that we have growing here in New England called bishop's weed or goutweed, and I don't mind. The goutweed's not going away where it is, but the motherwort grows taller than it so that they can coexist, and that's really a lovely symbiotic relationship. Motherwort is going to create a bitter taste. It also uptakes nutrients and minerals from the soil and is incredibly potent to have this bitterness inside of our something that we're eating on our greens, because it's going to help us to bring the energy, to ground the energy, and allow our digestive juices to get flowing. So now that we have, oh, and finally, I did forget one lovely little plant. I have a bowl full of violets. You can see leaf and flower. And the violets are a nice, nourishing, moistening spring plant. So we're going to put some of the violet leaves and the violet flowers into our mix. One option for us today is to have, this is basically my herb grinder. It's just a little teeny tiny coffee grinder I only use for plants and nuts because the coffee is so intense. And so I'm going to take most of what I have off of the stems. The violet stems are kind of moist. And now I'm putting in the red raspberry. I only have like 2 or 3 leaves. And I'm going to have to do a couple different batches. But this is one nice, easy way to just get them really ground up. Sometimes you have to be really creative with it. I like to shake it while I grind it. Some of the leaves are just stuck right in the top here. And sometimes the best way is actually just to chop with our hands. So we'll also experiment with that. All right, I'm gonna unplug it, and then I'm just gonna scoop out with my finger what I got inside. This would be a great way to make pesto, and plop it into my jar. I'm satisfied with that. It gives me a lot of surface area for the apple cider vinegar to extract all the nutrients, vitamins, and minerals out of these lovely plants. And I'd also be happy with just chopping it up here. So I need to get my glove on because I really am kind of a wimp when it comes to getting stung with stinging nettles. Now the problem is I can only find one glove right now, and the holding hand is the one that I need the glove on really. So I'm going to remove the stinging nettles. I'm going to tenderly hold them. I find with nettles that if I say to them, thank you for your medicine, please spare me from any long-lasting stings, they generally do. If I'm mindless, wham, they whap me. Like today I was bending down to take a photo of them and didn't notice there were some behind me, and I squinched down onto the ground and they just nipped me in the bottom. So I'm not actually going to chop these with my hand. I'm going to put them in the grinder after I take them off of their stem. They're fresh. I just picked them about 15 minutes ago. And I'm shaking them so that they get mixed into the blade, because right now they're kind of stuck. You know, they're moist. This machine isn't really made for moist, fresh leaves. A good question is, would a blender be okay to use? Absolutely. A blender would be excellent. I'm making these with the folk method, so I'm not going to give you measurements. And this is essentially working. It's just taking a little bit extra because the blade's close to the bottom and the plants are really fluffy. I'm not going to give you measurements. I am going to say cover the plant material with apple cider vinegar till it's about 1 inch taller. I'm not too worried that my glove is filled with soil because the soil here is organic. We don't put anything on it. I'm happy to have a little bit of soil in my apple cider vinegar. I'm not really happy to have it if I'm using the greens for salads, which you could essentially use all of these greens to make a nice spring green salad. Nettle might be a little challenging. It's going to sting your mouth. I wouldn't recommend it, but I'd probably make a tea out of the nettles to have alongside of the salad. And so here we go. Moving right along, imagine that all the plants that we harvested, that we discussed, are now chopped and deposited into the jar. I'm going to take my live culture, which still has some of the fermented mother inside of it, and shake it. I have about a half a bottle here, and I'm just going to pour it nicely over top of the plants that we just ground up. If I was only using this much plants, I wouldn't even need this entire bottle. However, I am going to pour it in because after I log off, I'm going to chop the rest of these plants and fit into this bottle whatever I can. Next step I'm going to do is put a lid on it and shake and pray every day. I shake it, I acknowledge it, I say thank you, and in that moment I'm just so thankful for living in a place where the plants grow and I can go right outside. You know, just so thankful that spring is here and that I'm going to be able to look up a honey mustard vinaigrette dressing recipe, strain out the plant material in 1 week, and make a beautiful salad dressing with this. Because, you know, we need every little bit of what we can get in order to keep us wild. And these wild plants, most of them were not collected from the garden. They were collected from the wild places where they chose to plant themselves. And I love that about this infused spring vinegar that can turn into a vinaigrette. And I encourage you to find these simple plants and see what's in your yard and make a vinaigrette of that. Even if it's one plant, even if it's dandelion greens, it can also be dandelion roots. Enjoy your spring tonic.